All right, yeah, thanks for all coming today. I'm going to be talking about interesting vulnerability in the backdoor I found on a very once popular brand of Chinese commercial routers. Yeah, let's just get started. All right, so the way this started is it was just after a little while after I started working at Tenable on their zero-day research team. And we were doing a bit of like a consumer-grade router roundup, you know, just getting a bunch of routers like hauled off Amazon or Walmart or wherever, and then just, doing what we do, looking for vulnerabilities and so on. And the Wavelength AC 1200 just arrived by mail one day. It looks a lot like this guy right here. I set it up, I plugged it in, I go to like the landing page IP, there's nothing there. I kind of, ping around a little bit, look at like, oh, okay, it's on a different address than it said it was going to be. So I go there and see what I see. And I see this. In fact, what I see is like right here. So that's weird, this says Phicomm. It's all in Chinese. It doesn't seem to be a wavelength router at all. And I kind of looked around. This apparently was not the only person this happened to. We have this angry review on Amazon there where someone seems to have had the same experience. Quite suspicious, they say. And, kinda. So now I'm really curious. So I don't even know where to find it. I've never heard of Phicomm before. So I'm like, oh, I should really just take this chance to dig in, see what I find. This is kind of neat. It's always nice to get surprises. So I searched on like Google and then Baidu, and the search for the Phicomm K2G-A1, which was what it identifies itself as once you log in, brought up listings for this familiar-looking device, spitting image, really, of the Wavelength AC 1200. It turns out this is identical hardware, and there's sort of an interesting story of how one became the other, which I'll broach right at the end of the talk. I'll kind of leave it as like hanging as a mystery for now. But yeah, they're the same router, but with different firmware. Although this did have, I tore the lid off it, and I don't remember what I did with it, but it used to say Wavelength, but Phicomm on the inside. So, introducing the Phicomm K2G-A1. Let's see what we can find in this thing. If you go, you log in, you like set it up. I was using like a lot of like Google Translate, a lot with like the little phone, scanner and so on. And I fumbled my way through it. I don't read any Chinese, so I apologize in advance for any translation errors in this talk. I got to the system status page. I take this to be. It identifies the device. The model is K2G, hardware version A1. It's running firmware version 22.6.3.20. And it's a fairly ordinary, router HTTP interface that you see here. I wanted to kind of take a deeper dive. So I started looking around, seeing if there were any known vulnerabilities to this. Maybe there'd be something unpatched. Maybe I'd find something there. And on some like Chinese router hacking forums, I did find, thanks to Google Translate, some documentation on a pretty simple post-auth command injection vuln to get shell access. Great, you find these things everywhere, and it was nice to find one here. For this one, this was thanks to upantool.com. I forget the original author, I have to dig that up. Basically it's just like a little command injection when you're setting the update time for the automatic firmware updates. Nothing too special there, but there's what it's showing here is a command that just starts the telnet daemon so you can log in, poke around. I set it to like just some high port so it wouldn't interfere with whatever else I wanted to find or start there. And boom, got a shell, cool. Now I'm in, now I can look around, and a post-auth command injection is only really like so interesting. It would be really nice if I could find some way to like, crack this pre-auth or WAN-side or something a little bit more, bit more meat on it. And something that was mine, So first things first there, I just took a look at what services were running. And I saw something that kind of caught my interest here, which is what most of the rest of this talk is going to be about. Right here, can you see my little mouse pointer? I should do a big flashy one. Oh no, look, I put an arrow on there. Yeah, I thought ahead. Yeah, we have this daemon called telnetd startup. You see this sort of thing sometimes on routers. It's a way of providing a kind of service backdoor for either the maintenance or law enforcement, just to gain shell access on the router. And sometimes these things are just gaping open. Actually, if you look at where the wavelength routers that replace these, the ones that have the proper firmware have a very easy to enter backdoor. There's not really much of a challenge there. You just have to guess the secret URL. But so I'm like, okay, well, it'd be nice to document this. I figured it would be something fairly simple. Maybe you send a magic packet, you log in or whatever. Netgear has one like that. Didn't seem entirely foreign, but yeah, so running on UDP port 21210. And some first impressions. Like this router in general, we were looking at a 32-bit MIPS little endian elf binary. It's running as a daemon with root permissions. The operating system is a fork of OpenWRT. And this thing listens just completely quietly on port 21210. So that, if you hit it, Nmap will report it as just sort of, open or filtered. It doesn't return any data unless you know how to knock on it. So it's fairly discreet, really. And, first thing I do when I get a binary, of course, I take a look at the string dump. And here's a curated list of interesting strings in this binary, just to get started. We've got, this looks neat here. This looks like it is an RSA key. Probably you'd assume a public key or what have you. And just in hex, about the right size for that, especially when we see RSA public encrypt and decrypt. And this itself is kind of a funny pair, that we have just public encrypt and public decrypt. Normally you encrypt with the public key, you decrypt with the private key. There's some uses for doing the reverse, like for signatures and so on. But that will become significant. We have a couple shell commands. One launches telnet, just as you'd expect from telnetd startup. The other one is it just writes to the EEPROM memory, and I'll show you what that does in a minute. We also have this, ABCDEF 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be significant too. So, let's take a look at it in Ghidra now. So, if the main loop of this service, it listens on a socket. It transitions between several states, and there's a whole kind of expected protocol that you have to interact with it through in order to get it to launch telnet. And so here's what we're looking at. We begin in, this is the state variable, and I'll show you the labeled version in a minute. It was stripped when I got it. We begin in state 2, which is itself kind of interesting. It's just some enum, but it's, kind of curious that you choose the number 2 to represent your initial state, but, whatever, we move along. Then we go to state 0. Then we go to state 1. And what do we have to do to transition from one state to another? We'll see that. Oh, and then state 1, this sort of has a go-to and a fairly trivial check. So we'll look at the code that it goes to. This is the rest of state 1. Here, it compares the user input to a couple variables here, and then depending on if it likes what it sees, it will either execute one of these 2 shell commands. So, I think I kind of know what I'm looking at so far here. If the EEPROM flag is written, then then when telnetd startup just starts up, it checks that EEPROM. If it's running, it just throws open the telnet service as well. And this is a way that you can preserve telnet access across reboots. So let's go through this state by state, because I figured if there's ever a place where I can really get into the weeds, this is probably it. So let's do some reversing here. We're going to go into state 2, the initial state when we're interacting with this thing. All right, so here we go. This is sort of the main block. And first, there's a check here that where we're looking at the user input, stack2e0. And this is what this check does. I'll give you the labeled version. All right, so this one here, it's I take it to be check state. Luckily, it has a logging message, unlike pretty much just about everything else in this binary. And this looks fairly simple, kinda. It checks the input to see if it's equal to this token ABCDEF1234. It contains checks for STSE and STTH as well, but this is dead code. There's 2 times in the code that check state is called, and both times the second argument is a constant. It's just the number 2. So we're seeing some kind of like this is where we start getting into a little bit of like the archaeology of this program here. Like we're seeing some long buried cruft, and this will become kind of neat. I never quite solved the mystery of these 2 tokens, but it's a taste of some things to come here. So it checks to see if the first token is ABCDEF1234. If it is, it will respond. And here's where it builds up the data that it sends back to the user. So want to see what's going on here. We see it grabbing a string, K2 cost down, __ ver 3.0. And this looks like some sort of device identifier. It's not the public name for the router, but it seems to be using internally to identify the router as this router, this model. And then we have these 3 functions. To see what those do, let's take a look. All right, I mean, this looked fairly straightforward to reverse here. I open this up, I see these, I see these like 4 telltale D words. We're looking here at an MD5 hash context. And this can kind of like, serve you pretty well when you're reversing. If you run into some struct that just seems to have these kind of magic numbers assigned, often it will turn out that you're looking at some sort of like hash initialization structure. These numbers, they might not be set in stone that you have to set them up like this, but in practice they kind of are. So if you see kind of a series of magic number constants, you search for it on GitHub, you Google it, whatever, you dig up the context. And so I was pretty confident here. This is just MD5 init, just sort of a home-rolled version. So we have an MD5 hash of this identifier. And a hash of the identifier actually is it's a hash of a 128-byte buffer where the identifier sits at the beginning and the rest is padded with zeros. This is already starting to look like a bit of like a, hints of standardization here, like that, you could imagine sort of that, on other models is a different version identifier plopped into this buffer and hashed. This seems likely so far. So it generates this hash, and if you do hit it with the magic word at the beginning, ABCDEF1234, it will respond with, this 32 bytes of just high entropy data. That is the MD5 hash of the device identifier. So what this is sort of a knock-knock who's there step of the protocol. The router is identifying itself as this particular model of router. This takes us to the second state, state 0. All right. So take a look at this. So here, in the second state, a bit of a funny check there, just, if it's, right, we have like the state checker function, and then we have this. This is kind of neat. It takes the user supplied data, it checks, it copies, the 80 bytes of it, or hex 80 bytes, 128 bytes of it. It then goes over to this RSA public decrypt nonce. It's expecting the user to send something that's been encrypted with a public RSA, that's been encrypted with a private RSA key, which will then use the public key that's baked into the binary to decrypt. And I think this is already what sort of sets this backdoor apart in its design, is it's at least kind of aiming to be a securely locked backdoor. If you don't have the master keys for it, you shouldn't be able to kind of go through this interaction, is the thinking. So it decrypts that message that the user sends. I call it the nonce. I mean, maybe there's some specific content that's expected, but we'll see why I just sort of treat it like that. Effectively, the user sends in some data. It's decrypted with the public key, meaning it's expecting it to have been private key encrypted, and that's an expectation that we're going to see some interesting violations of soon. And then what it does, we're going to look at these 2 functions. It generates a random string of plain text. Here, it produces 31 bytes of printable characters, random printable characters. You see that here with the little modulus and so on in the offset. So, alphanumeric and symbols. And it stores it in a global variable. Randomly generated plain text, I called it. Then the next function is RSA encrypt with public key. So now it takes that public key and it encrypts the data. It's sort of more standard encryption operation. And then that gives us its encrypted secret. It takes that and sends it back to the client, sort of as an authentication challenge. So you hit it with ABCD and so on. It sends back an identifying hash. That hash is presumably used in a lookup table that you, the legitimate user of this backdoor, has, which will then fetch the proper private RSA key. You encrypt something or other, you send it over there, it decrypts it, stores it in a variable, generates a secret, and sends it to you to decrypt, you'd think, right? I mean, this is kind of looking ahead a bit. Meanwhile, and how are we doing for time here? Because I got it marked at, yeah, we're doing great. And then we've got these two functions that it calls right after sending, sort of setting things up for the next state. Now, this is where things get really interesting here, or they will. They're interesting to me. I'm hoping in hindsight, maybe I can build up a little bit of suspense. It takes that randomly generated plain text. It takes that decrypted nonce, and it just XORs them. And so now it has, stores it in a global variable that I just labeled XORed message, and then put the address there. Something I tend to do in my early drafts just so I can remember where everything is. I tidied up most of it for the presentation, but not all of it. All right, so we XOR the random secret, and the decrypted payload. We store that. The next function, and this is sort of the key. I'd call it set ephemeral keys. What it does is it takes that XORed message, which is, again, part random secret, part decrypted nonce, and it concatenates it with the salt perm and temp, and then it hashes those with MD5 again, and it sets the hash up in perm key and temp key, and just two more global variables. And so, take a close look at this. This is going to be really significant. This is kind of where the heart of it is. If you see an issue here already, just write it down or something, and you can have it in an envelope or something when I reveal it. It'll be more exciting that way. And so here is just the fully labeled, state 0, just so you can kind of see it all at a glance. There we go. How's everything? Is the font size and everything good? Is everyone kind of good pace here? Cool. All right. Like I said, I wanted to get into the weeds with this. Now, we go to state 1, the third and final state. Now, this state, when we're in state 1, here's a bit of a go-to. Most of it's contained in this branch. It takes the user input, which is in the variable payload buffer. It compares it to perm key, and it compares it to temp key. And if it matches either one of those, it runs a shell command. Sets up the shell command in the the branch body, then just calls system on it. So we can see kind of what this whole protocol is doing so far, right? There's a knock knock who's there step. There is give me some encrypted data and I'll decrypt it. You proving that you have the key, right? Kinda. And then we have a generating of a random secret. The secret sent back to the client, presumably to decrypt. It then generates these keys. There we go. Yep. There's another little kind of a little curl in the state machine diagram here, which is that if at this stage you just send the knock knock again, it sends you back to the beginning state. And here are the keys. Sometimes I go ahead and say something, then remember I do have a slide for it. All right, so how is the client supposed to determine these keys, right? This is the final stage of the protocol is that the client is then asked to provide an ephemeral password, which is supposed to be something that can only be guessed by a legitimate client, one that has the proper tool for interacting with this backdoor, which has a client who has the database of private keys. So here's how it's built. just a review. Public key decrypted nonce, a random string of 31 printable characters, then a null. They're XORed together. They're concatenated to the salt either temp or perm, or they produce 2 different passwords with this. Then the whole thing is MD5 hashed. So we're expected to use the same private key that we use to encrypt the nonce to decrypt the random secret that we get back in response, and then we can then compose an ephemeral key using the same formula the first server does, this formula. All right, so does anyone see what the problem might be here so far? Like any assumptions that are going to get this whole protocol kind of turned on its head? Oops. Okay, we don't have the private RSA key, first of all, right? Like I looked. It seemed totally possible that it could have gotten leaked. These things happen. I looked for a key pair. I formatted the public key in all sorts of different formats, like PEMS and SSH style and whatever. I searched Google and Baidu and GitHub. I didn't find a leaked private key. But so maybe there's another way of getting this, guessing these ephemeral passwords. So we got to look a bit more closely at this part here, the concatenation step, because although I think the developer was clearly thinking of this as just abstract concatenation, just sticking 2 things together, that abstraction hid something very, very important from the designer of this, this service and this protocol. Look at the way the concatenation actually works instead of ephemeral keys. Does anyone see the problem here? You can shout it out if you see it. How are they being concatenated? sprintf, right? With the %s specifier. What's the %s specifier? How does that format data? String. What kind of string? Null terminated string, yeah. Yeah, not length prefix or anything like that, null terminated. This XORed message, is it going to be a well-formed null terminated string? Have they guaranteed that in any way? Have they? I mean, it's a random string of printable characters. Okay, that part's a null terminated ASCII string, no problem there. But they XOR it with something decrypted from the client. So maybe you're thinking here, oh, okay, well, the client could manipulate this, but only if they have the private key. And if that case, you're really just kind of breaking down a door that you have the key for. There's no point in doing that, right? You want to be like, yeah, I can smash the window in the door to my own house where I have the key. You can. But you could kind of forgive them for overlooking that. And maybe they did, right? So here we have an assumption here about null terminated data where there's no reason on earth to think it's going to be null terminated. In fact, if you had sent, if you had also sent a printable string, right? That was an XOR with another printable random string, fair chance if there's any collisions, you'll have a null byte. If you kind of just by magic guess the exact same string, it would be a totally null buffer. But we don't need a null buffer, we need a null byte. And where would we need a null byte in order to make this password predictable? Yeah, right at the beginning, because then it's an empty string. A full buffer can be an empty string if it starts with a null byte. So, yeah, this makes sense, but only huge assumptions. And this is where it just hit me, right? I'd been hitting a wall with this for a while. I was reading up on RSA, Oracle attacks, and so on. It was just and I was hitting the wall for a week or more. And then I just decided to diagram out what I had. I'm like, all right, well, maybe this is a wrap here, but at least I can kind of document it. And I'm doing the little protocol diagram, going through it step by step again. And then I just see it's not a concatenation. It's not abstractly. It's an sprintf. It's a null. It's making huge assumptions about a null terminated string that just do not hold water. So I'm like, yeah, I am just exploding warthog heading here. This is freaking great. All right, so now we need to find some control, right? We're not quite there yet. If we had a way to make the first byte of this randomly generated message 0, we could easily predict the ephemeral passwords, right? They'd just be the hashes of the salts, that's all. And we know the salts because we can dump them. We can string dump them. How do we make the first byte of this 0? with any probability if we don't have the private key? Well, let's look at the public key, the public decrypt nonce function again, because there's an important detail here that's really easy to overlook, especially if you're just familiar to the way RSA is used in just about any application that uses RSA. You might forget that it's doing what happens when you do kind of a slightly antique textbook RSA decryption with no padding. That 3 is an enum, which is defined in the OpenSSL codebase as RSA no padding. You know what that means? It's friggin' great. Like, we don't need the corresponding RSA key to have some control over what an unpadded application of RSA public decrypt does to our input. If we just want to control the first byte of the plain text, trial and error is going to be enough. Like, there's only so many bytes. There's 256 of them. All right, and if in fact, this is kind of funny. I was just sort of taking a look just early this morning, actually. I was looking back at the documentation in OpenSSL 1.0.0, or maybe I had 0.2. And the documentation had gone a little bit stale. If you look at what they have for public decrypt, they don't even mention the padding parameter, right? So I mean, this stuff has just sort of been sitting in a text file since before, I guess, was it PKCS 1.5 or whatever. It's just been sitting there unchanged. You have actually the signature of the functions changed. I just grepping, found this. But it's a nice, clear explanation of what textbook RSA does. Just nice to review, right? I mean, it takes your plain text, it raises it to the exponent e, and this, kind of by custom, that tends to be hex. I'm going to get the 0 count right here. Hex 10,001, right? And then it's going to mod it by RSA n, which is the public key modulus. Now, what can you apply this function to? Any number. I mean, except for maybe implementation quirks in there, you can just pass it any byte string, right? Which is then converted to a big num, and then they perform this operation on it. So you can pass anything to public decrypt. It doesn't have to actually be ciphertext, in the sense of it doesn't have to be something that someone else has already enciphered. And so I did a little more, just background reading here. And this is the essay that introduces OAEP, which is the padding algorithm that's used in RSA PKCS version 2 or something. I should have had this written in front of me. I'm really not a cryptographer, and if I make any mistakes in cryptography or Chinese, someone can just jump in, right? Or, financial analysis or whatever at the end. I'm kind of just winging it. But I just sit down and do some reading, and you learn a thing or two. So I found just this little paragraph here. A variety of goals for encryption have come to be known, which are actually stronger than the notion of these include non-malleability and chosen ciphertext security. We introduce a new notion of an encryption scheme being plain text aware. Roughly said, it should be impossible for a party to produce a valid ciphertext without knowing the corresponding plain text. In the ideal hash model that we assume, this notion can be shown to imply non-malleability and chosen ciphertext security. Now, I'm not going to go any further into these particular weeds of OAEP because this doesn't use OAEP. It doesn't use any padding scheme. So this RSA unpadded, textbook RSA, is a form of encryption that is not plain text aware. Yeah, that's it. All right, so if we can produce a phony but valid ciphertext, knowing only the public key, what do we want to do with that? It should be kind of come into light here, right? So the Telnet startup service places very few constraints on what the corresponding plaintext should be. Although it kind of looks superficially like a MAC signature check, it's not doing that. It's not really checking the plaintext for anything. It's just kind of taking it and doing some manipulations to it. In fact, it is making assumptions about it, but it doesn't check them. You can kind of just tease out what those assumptions might be, but that's just that's the kind of what's the the hermeneutic part of reverse engineering. There, you're trying to just sort of suss out the designer's intentions so that you can then subvert them by comparing it to what the program is actually doing. So it checks to see if it's a string, or a string length check. But it's not going to be, like, unless there's a memory corruption, it's never going to be bigger than that because the key itself is only 1,024 bits. But maybe they're designing this in a way that can be extended for larger key sizes in the future. Like, it is meant to be kind of like a plug-and-play system. So the random secret contains only printable characters, which are ones in this range, right? And the random secret is XORed with the decrypted nonce that we control. And so if we randomly generate a nonce that decrypts to an array of bytes that begins with a printable character, we got a 1 in 94, like hex 5D or whatever, chance of causing an XOR collision that makes the XOR message begin with a null byte. 1 in 94 chance for cracking like a cryptographic password with a fucking computer. Like, that's good, right? I mean, your bike lock has better security than that. Like, your cheap bike, your dollar store bike lock, where you get like 3 or 4 numbers in a row. That's at least going to take someone like 10,000 guesses. But no, 1 in 94, we can do this if we set it up right. And then, like we said, if it starts with a null byte, boom, the concatenation is just perm and temp, which means all that gets hashed is the salt. So, demo time. I got a couple demos here. I didn't have a video. I'm just going to do it live. So wish me luck. And if I have to walk out of here head hung low and shamefaced, just remember that I went out there without a net. All right, so got this little VM here. The only trouble I had setting this up so far was just, again, traveling with my work MacBook, right? I tested all this out on Linux. I'm like, oh, I'll just Dockerize it or whatever. Weird things happened. Anyway. Luckily, I do have this VM set up for the workshop I took this week, the baseband exploitation. It's the same machine. Fantastic course. If anyone has a chance to take it next year, had a great time there. But right now, we're going to use this to hack this router from. Let's make sure that it is awake. 168.2.1. Boy, I got those demo fingers going. You never count on that, right? You're not going to be able to type at your regular speed. It's pinging. All right, so lockpick. Lockpick target 192.168.2.1. I'll explain what this variable means in a bit. This is the protocol selector, 3. I named them, 1, 2, and 3. This is the guy, right? The fact that the lid is off shouldn't really be shouldn't concern you. I just, I'm better at taking these things apart than putting them back together. Plastic gets cracked. Sometimes I use horrible and violent means to get them apart, air guns and shit. Yeah, so this doesn't require hardware access. Let's see if it works. Okay. Boom, we're in, root shell. All right, thank you. Yeah, there we go. There we are, yep. There's our guy. We got root. Unauthenticated root over LAN. There you go. So are other models and firmware versions affected? Let's see. I'm about at halftime now. And you know what? I'm about where I should be at halftime. Okay, good. So to find out, I ordered Phicomm's newest consumer router, the one that was the most recently made, the K3C. Yeah, Vanna Whiten it up here. Oh, hey, it's me. So, while I waited for it to arrive, and it took a minute, I just went scouring the Chinese language router hacking forums, which are really great. I mean, if I feel like I could learn a lot more about router hacking if my Chinese was better. So maybe that will motivate me to take the plunge. I looked around for as many leaked firmware blobs as I could find, going through the Wayback Machine. I was finding people's FTP shares. I was hoping that nobody was trying to trap me and put something horrible up there. But, I went and grabbed as many as I could. And I was able to identify 3 different variations of this protocol. Now, this was itself kind of interesting, because just a bit of an aside here. When you see something that's that kind of complex and just as baroque for something as simple as a knock knock, let me in, give me the telnet, oh man, I can see myself away from that. It's really distracting. All right. No, you don't have to stop. I mean, it's okay. Other people can see me. It's cool. Right. So, I mean, when I first saw that, my first thought was like, wow, this seems like kind of, involved for a one-off deal. Like, why would they go through all this trouble and add all this complexity for something that could be much simpler, you'd think, right? Especially since that complexity didn't seem to give them any security. Didn't seem to give them the, complete security anyway. So my first sort of slightly paranoid thought was, which, I remember telling kind of the boss at work, I'm like, I'm wondering if I found like a standardized backdoor protocol, like, does anyone know anything about this? And no one did. So then, what this sort of resulted in, a little bit of nervousness up the chain at work about like how we're going to like disclose this or publicize this. Because if it is something like a standardized, mandated backdoor protocol, of the sort we saw in, in Travis's like really cool talk just a moment ago, with like the Clipper chip, there can be some real political interest in keeping it kind of locked down. I mean, I'm clearly getting into some kind of delusions of grandeur at this point. I'm like, wow, did I find like, is this like sneakers or whatever? Like, did I find the box? So we kind of like they soft pedaled the disclosure for this a little bit. Not that it's to the company, which I tried. I'll tell that story at the end of the talk. But at least as far as like, are we going to make a public thing about this? The pendulum swung back and forth pretty wildly at the time. Because they didn't want to like, invite retribution if it turned out to be serious. Again, I mean, getting a little bit paranoid there. But it can happen. The imagination runs wild. But so I went and dug up all these variations of Phicomm Router firmware dating back to 2017. And they're released on a variety of architectures, MIPS cell, MIPS, ARM, and I got some that were released, one that was released for the international market, this guy, and others released just for the Chinese market. Organize them by version number and so on, scan them for like fingerprints. Of course, just hash the telnet D startup binary, so I knew how many I'd actually have to look at carefully, right? Now, what I noticed was, it's not until the more recent batch in 2018 that you start seeing any kind of device identifier in there, or seeing the ABC key, like ABCDEF 1, 2, 3, 4 handshake. The other interesting thing is that there's no variation on the public and like private keys. The public keys used, I'll get to the private part, in the binaries. Older versions all use the same one. Hilariously, the oldest ones I was able to find, the K2 and the K3C, now the algorithm I'm going to show in a bit, much the same, but it includes both the private and the public key, the full RSA key pair. It doesn't even use the private key. Like someone just sort of forgot. Or like didn't really know what they were doing and just, like, oh, I better put the whole key in there, right? I mean, it's like right there in the name, private key. Anyway, so they released that. Then I'll show you what happened there. It's very, very funny. I mean, to me, I thought it was really funny. And I sort of, look at some of the other kind of traits of it. One cute thing is in some of the old ones, the temp and perm salts, are actually temp and perp, like some typo that just sort of lasted for a few releases. So you can get like, temporary and perpendicular access to the router. It's all good. And I tested every one of these I found, just, spinning something up through QEMU. Usually not full system emulation, but like enough, like I'd throw in like a little like QEMU true, right? Like with a static QEMU in there. Just to make sure I could kind of get it to, to the point where it's trying to launch Telnet. Often, as a result, just because of the way these particular MIPS architectures are set up, it would instead throw an illegal instruction exception when it tries to call the system call clone. But I could at least see what was about to happen. Then these two, of course, I tested in hardware. All right, so let's take a little walk through history here. Backdoor Protocol version 1. I really love this part of the work where you're doing kind of like, it's almost like feeling like an archaeologist of some sort there, right? You're just trying to like understand like the reasoning and the design for this system by like looking at kind of earlier failed attempts. Or, partial successes or just earlier iterations. You can kind of like start to understand like the reasoning for this thing as you peel back its history. So here, the Phicomm K2 router. Here's a little picture of it. Looks kind of similar. Different architecture there. I think it's big endian. And so if you look at the set ephemeral keys function, the rest of the algorithm, similar shape. We see one difference here, which is that it's not using, I just labeled this myself, it's not using the XORed secret message, it's just taking the decrypted nonce, which is the decryption of like what the client sends, and it's just concatenating it right there. So this means that there's the same vulnerability affects this, but just it's a little bit simpler. Whereas before, you want to make sure, you want to come up with a phony ciphertext that just happens to have a printable character at the beginning, because that gives you a 1 in 94 chance of collision. If you're hitting protocol 1, you want to come up with a ciphertext that has a null byte at the beginning, right? And then, you're good. Because luckily, RSA is used to encrypt binary data and doesn't assume you're dealing with a null-terminated string. Very similar attack can be performed here. Of course, they left the key under the mat. So like, you don't actually have to do it this way. I did, because I like the elegance of it. I didn't want to have to. It's like, when you're playing chess, sometimes like you get a really satisfying game. You get like a checkmate, you're like, oh yeah, that was, and then sometimes someone just kind of like absent-mindedly hangs their queen, and you're like, and you kind of clobber them. But like, what all hung on a blunder. Most chess games I play probably kind of go like that way for me when I lose them. They're decided on blunders at the early level, and it's like, okay, it's still a win, but it doesn't feel as good. So this one, I was like, all right, I'm not going to try just using the key. Let's try and do this the hard way, and it worked. Here's a little diagram of protocol 1. I think that's nice and legible, just to review how it all works. The user produces a message. Could be random or whatever. Maybe there's something they use, but I'm going to know without seeing the client code. So I call it a nonce, because I've been using random ones. It concatenates them, creates the passwords. The user has to guess the passwords, which in theory would mean the user has the key. But in practice means the user can take advantage of textbook RSA not being plain text aware. And so same attack works. Where you create the MD5 hash, you just hash the salt of your choice, and you send that as the password, and boom, you're in. So, like I said, the most obvious flaw is that they just baked the private key into the binary. It's totally unforced there, right? They didn't need it. It was just gratuitously there, and you can see it right there. It's the 9FC string there, which you can just grep for, like, to see, how many instances had that. A handy trick, if you do like a string dump, I like hitting with like the offset, like the TX, and then set the string length to like 256 characters. You can find do a dump of, hex keys. So there we go. Boom! They left it right there. Hilarious. So tools for exploiting this backdoor, in these earlier models, do exist in the wild. Thanks again to these forums I was just crawling on, Google translating as I went, poorly. But I did find this tool, which I spun up in a little Windows VM, crossing my fingers that wasn't going to do anything too devious, and just try, reverse this a little bit. It does contain itself like the private key. It consistently sends this message repeatedly over the air when you start it up, when you point it at its target. And so it's really just going right ahead to to that stage of the protocol that I showed you earlier. It occurred to me this morning that since I have the private key, I should actually decrypt that and see what that buffer is. And I'm like, how did I not do that? I'm so curious now. What actually are they sending? I was just ignoring the private key route so entirely. I forgot that I actually have it. And then I thought, okay, no, it's a few hours before my talk. This is clearly a rabbit hole. I want to dive down it. I can't believe I haven't yet. But I really got to finish these slides, and so. Something so you can take home with you. What does that say? I bet is it something funny? I don't know. Maybe. Oh, and this is what it looks like trying to use the Google Eye, the translation mode on a VM screen. Because I couldn't, for whatever reason, I'm just not much of a Windows person, I couldn't figure out how to copy the text off the GUI. Like it was just kind of like rasterized into it. So I'm like, all right, I'm just like pointing the camera at it, and it's like just saying all sorts of weird things to me. Version 2. So version 2 was the next color in my little table. So, like I say, finally this guy arrived off Amazon, and I mean, at this point when it arrived, I didn't quite understand about the different protocol versions yet, right? This sort of accumulated over time. And it's funny because the version, the firmware blob that I found for K3C was for the domestic market, and it was exactly the same as the K2G, except that well, there was a couple of fun surprises there, but yeah, it was pretty much the same deal, except it was like compiled to a different architecture, and so on. Big endian MIPS, I think it was, instead of little endian. But this one didn't, right? Like I tried to interact with my tool at first and it wasn't working. It was like clearly doing something a bit different. And they'd also patched the command injection, so I didn't have a good way of getting a shell at first. I really wanted to see what was going on in this. And I hadn't really figured out, like I said, the whole history of the protocol. So, didn't work there. Scanned it and all that. Well, okay, we do have port 21.21.0. That's promising. Let's get inside and take a closer look. So, took it apart. It does have a UART port. Nice. That you come to expect. Great. I really do not have fantastic hardware skills, and really didn't at this point. But I did have a hot air gun, and I opened a window, and I just kind of burrowed my way into it. Got my UART pin soldered though, without hurting myself badly, and minimal brain damage, and good, right? Got my little bridge, this little guy, plugged it in, got to work. And so what this gave me, once I figured out the right minicom settings, which took a minute, which I do have written down somewhere. I go into a U-boot menu if I interrupt the booting. The funny thing is, at first I was like, I was getting something wrong in the minicom setup, and I thought it was read-only. So I was like actually I was interrupting the boot process by like glitching the wire, to send a signal over. And I was like, oh, this is, wow, that's clever. And then I realized I just there's a menu option. But so I'm like, oh man, that was a stunt. And now it's just clearly like I just did not read the documentation. Anyway, so I got into a little U-boot menu, unauthenticated. I'm able to dump the NAND. The format of the NAND, a little bit curious. I dumped it with a little expect script. I found one that somebody else had written for another router. I made the proper modifications to it, and I threw it on this one. Let it run overnight, got a big hex dump, reserialized it. Just kind of took a look at it, right? Lots of high entropy blobs in there. It's got et cetera password. Oh, so most of it was like encrypted base64, or base64 encrypted something. It was kind of weird, or compressed in an algorithm I didn't know. I did find, however, a plain text et cetera password file. I threw hashcat on it, and boom, got the password. It was admin. So yes, I could have guessed, but it was winter probably, and it kept me warm. So I loaded the binary once I got in there, pulled it off into Ghidra, and the goddamn thing is already labeled, right? Like, oh, that's cool. I was so proud of my labeling, I'm like, all right, well now we already got a labeled version. Lesson here is if you have an unlabeled binary, there might be a labeled build of it around somewhere. But there we go. You see a very similar shape algorithm, except it doesn't have the knock-knock part. It doesn't do the A, B, C, D, E, F, 1, 2, 3, 4 part. And it doesn't have a device identifier. And in fact, here we go, in public decrypt, funnily enough, Ghidra actually didn't load the string table where it was pointing to there. So I'm like, that's fine. Let's do it the easy way. We'll just call strings. And we see that the public key string is, in fact, at that offset. There is no private key in there. But doesn't that look familiar? Look at that public key. Does this look familiar? Yeah. yeah, it's the same one they had with the leaked pair. And just, they're like, well, they redacted part of it. They didn't change it. It's not like it's that hard. Are random numbers so rare in your line of work? Like, are you hoarding all your entropy to feed your starving children that you can't just generate another one? I guess, they already probably had the client code deployed, and, then you can break compatibility with that. Who knows what arrangements are made for the access of these things? So, they redact and hope for the best. Same public key, use the back in the K2. So, you just hope for the best. But it's all right. Like I said, I don't actually need the private key, and I wanted to do this in a more interesting way. To kind of exploit it in a principled way, not just win on a blunder. So it's already plugged in. Yeah, let's do this. We have demo 2 here. Won't take long. Let's do it. Let's use that tool. Okay. So here are the protocol diagram for this version. I can kind of step through this quickly. I don't want to take too much of the next person's time slot. I think we're at a 10-minute offset anyway, so we should be okay. But yeah, it's the same protocol minus the knock knock who's there step. And now I think it's very clear that the knock knock who's there step was introduced when they decided we can't keep using the same leaked key. Each device should have, or each model should have its own key, and that should be associated with an identifier. So someone clearly made that decision, right? And then the client tool, whatever it is, would contain a database of private keys that were just keyed to, or associated with the device identifier hashes. We're good. But yeah, same protocol, which means we can exploit it in the same way. We just skip the knock knock. And so demo time. All right, here we go. All right, I left Telnet running on that little thing, but not on this thing here too. So ping 192.168.2.1, please connect, yes. Let me just satisfy you all that Telnet is not currently running on it. Good. Sometimes I leave it running and forget. It's less impressive, honestly. Lockpick. Let's go back up there. Lockpick here, protocol selector 2. I figured I could have something in here that does a little fingerprinting or whatever, but it's one of those things where it could be fun to program that, but I'm really just saving myself 2 keystrokes, so this is fine. All right, here we go. Boom, we're in. All right, we have root on this device too now. Thank you. Info, yeah. Oh, no, God. See, you forget basic things sometimes. There we go. Now, back to the talk. That's the last demo I got here, so I'm just going to wrap up here now. Protocol version 3. This is back where we started. And here, yeah, I have my little theory about why this added complexity, where it came from, what motivated it. And never assume malice when incompetence does the trick, right? What we have are layers and layers of complexity that were added as poorly understood attempts to fix an issue with the previous one. Sometimes it'd be an issue that they were, if you want to say, what issue was it fixing with the first protocol? The leaked key, they didn't seem to pay that much mind. I think they just kind of hope for the best. But one thing you might remember for the first version of the protocol is that it's actually vulnerable to a replay style attack. You can just packet sniff, see what the authenticating message is, right? It's just sent over the clear over UDP, and then use that as the key. And so if you throw in a random string generator and an XOR it and so on, you're at least creating a challenge response protocol where it's not just vulnerable to a replay attack. Okay, so they did solve that problem. And, credit where credit's due. And then they, at some point, they're like, hey, remember that key that we actually, pushed to production and distributed with routers? Maybe we should use a different one. Maybe we should keep track of our keys. Maybe we should have a system for looking up new keys and so on. And you can almost imagine that having a database of keys, we can just look them up. The need for this was probably that just doing a router side switch of the key would have broken compatibility with the client tools. So they had to coordinate that a little bit better, and it couldn't be done all at once, right? These things take time, especially who are their clients for using these client tools? Is it just, are we just talking about Phicomm employees? Are we talking about law enforcement? There's many parties that might have an interest in having the backdoor keys for a router. And you can't just break all of their tools overnight without some coordination. So here we go. There's my little collection of Telnet startups. Here I am just dumping key length strings from them. You can see what's in what. And here's the diagram of protocol 3, which I've probably repeated enough that it should be everyone should be able to implement this from memory. In fact, in the Tenable Community CTF last year, there was a challenge where it was just my implementation of this protocol. And, it was a fun one. I think there were a couple solutions, but not too many. It was like really in the sweet spot. I was happy with that. All right, so there's protocol 3. Knock, knock, who's there? Nonce, decrypted, secret plaintext, XORed, ephemeral keys. You guess them by the hash. Then it opens. So the responsible disclosure process. I work at Tenable. I'm on the zero-day team. When we find a vulnerability, what we do is that we have it out here. We contact the vendor. We give them a 90-day warning. We say that we are going public with this vulnerability, but we prefer coordinated disclosure if possible. If they respond, the 90-day clock it starts from when we sent the contact, the successful contact. If they don't respond, they have a 45-day limit, right? And then we just go ahead and publish. And this works pretty well. Most of the time there's cooperation. It has kind of a nice balance of like, we're not going to make this too hard on you, but you have to take this seriously because we are going to release one way or another. So I go through the moves. This is kind of the tedious part of the job, and it's the part of the job where you're most likely to anger someone, and so it's like, okay. So I'm like sending out my emails, getting bounced back. It's funny. Like everything seems kind of shuttered. That's weird. Like you changed email servers like all at once and like not tell anyone. That was funny. I tried to reach out over other channels. I found that there was like, for example, an official, I think it was official, Telegram account for Phicomm. So I'm like, I'll just reach out over Telecom. Or Telegram, yeah. I'll reach out over Telegram. Didn't look promising. I'm seeing this, I'm just like, oh, Jesus. Jeez. Like, I'm feeling kind of bad. Anyway, finally, I get a response from their German team. It's good. They're very, very punctual there. And they tell me that Phicomm has closed all business worldwide since 2019. Their devices are still for sale. It's a little mysterious exactly the chicanes this went through, but things are being worked out, but for the worse. Like it is either dead or it is very much dying. Now, many of you probably have not heard of Phicomm before. If any of you maybe are familiar with like the tech industry in China, hopefully I think you are. It's this was one of the bigger router companies, one of the bigger electronics companies. When they were referred to as like little Huawei in the press and so on, but like just little, right? Like this is one of the big guys. This wasn't just some little fly-by-night shop, and it's a shop that had been around for like a couple decades. So this was a pretty big upset that this happened. So I'm curious. So here we go, a little potted history. Here's Google Ping. I think I made the faux pas here. I meant to correct this. I start referring to him by his given name. We're not that familiar. I should have referred to him as Goo here, if I'm even saying that right. Again, I apologize. But so he founds Shanghai Phicomm. Later, it comes to be known as Phicomm. Lianbi Financial, which will be a player in this story, founded in 2012. I'm not sure who founded it exactly at the time. 2014, Phicomm has declared an operating income of about $1.5 billion US, about 2 billion or so Canadian, 10 billion yuan. It initiates a merger with, I don't know how to pronounce exactly, but Phicomm Technology, formerly a pharmaceutical company. And gains control then of Lianbi Financial. This is something that only comes to light later in legal documents. It was, I think it was announced as a partnership at the time. Phicomm in 2015 announces this is what sinks them, the 0 yuan purchase plan, full rebate on every router purchased. If, we'll see what if in a minute, Phicomm, if I'm saying that right, discloses that Gu had gained control of their company as well. His Guping's affiliate, Jianyan, receives the largest fine in history from the Chinese Security Regulatory Commission. I think this is like the Chinese SEC, of $500 million US. Then in 2016, Gu claims to have lost financial control of Phicomm. So like, what's going on here? So the 0 yuan purchase plan had kind of a fun history to it here. This means you could get a full rebate on Phicomm routers and like smart home devices if you register for the Lianbi Financial and Huaxia Wanisha Financial peer-to-peer lending apps. Does anyone know what peer-to-peer lending is? It's like a sort of a blockchain-mediated, complicated Ponzi scheme. And for a while, it was like booming in China for like a few really brief years. And then in around 2018 or so, you start seeing news stories awkwardly translated saying things like, the thunder has fallen on the P2P lending racket. And there was just a massive government clean sweep of all these P2P lending companies. Rounding them up, there was just huge law enforcement effort, and it's done now. Like, you cannot do this in China anymore. However, when you bought a router, you would get this rebate. You get all your money back if you set up for these peer-to-peer lending schemes, whereupon you're encouraged to get these cheap loans. You're promised, huge returns on your investments in the app, like unrealistically large returns. Alarm bell ringing returns if you're not like yourself, in finance or whatever. If you are in finance, you'd be like, that's a suspicious-looking return. But no, like I said, it was a distributed cryptocurrency-enabled Ponzi scheme running in China. And here's the neat thing, I didn't talk about this yet, but one of the demons on these routers is called ad push. And I wish the upstream servers were still operating so I could see what it was pushing. But what it would do is it would solicit an upstream server, they're all dead now, and it would grab some advertisements or whatever, and then just inject them into your browser sessions. Like just serving you adware from the router. Maybe I'll dig a little deeper into that sometime. I wanted to understand that better. You can have access to that binary when you get in there too. Here we go. So, I found this sort of interesting paper. This just recently came out, and I've yet to kind of dig into it all myself, but if you want to do a little further reading, there is a paper out there in preprint, Crime and Crisis in China's P2P Online Lending Market, a comparative analysis of fraud. And this sort of tells the story. So Lianbi, this was the financial company that Gu obtained a controlling interest in, set up this sort of like promotional partnership with Phicomm, and basically used this flourishing router company. Like this was a multi-billion-dollar company to hawk a Ponzi scheme to its user base in exchange for free routers. So there's quite a few of these things on the market. You can find a bunch of these things on Shodan, where you shouldn't find them, because that means you've enabled remote management. You should never, ever, ever do this with a router, never with a commercial router. There is, I swear to God, no good reason for doing this. And I don't actually have it in this talk here, but if you Google me and some keywords from here, you can find another POC, which is actually a WAN side, if they enable remote management for the K2G, where you can basically hit an unauthenticated endpoint and say, could I have the Wi-Fi passwords, please? And we'll give you them back in base 64, like pre-auth. And how often do you find that on someone's router, unless they're particularly security-minded and you probably didn't give you access, they have a different admin password from a Wi-Fi password? Like, people only like to have one password, right? Like, and especially for one device. Like, no one's out there like setting the router up. I'm like, I really better set up, I'd better set up a different password for my admin and my Wi-Fi, and then I'd better put on the internet with remote management. Like, no, nobody's making both of those decisions, which means that you can actually just hit an endpoint on any router that has remote management, ask it for the Wi-Fi password. The Wi-Fi password will turn out to probably be, not that I checked, will probably be the admin password. You can walk right into the UI for managing the router. You can do that command injection I showed you, throw a reverse shell, and you're in. You have root on that router. So, anyway, that's a bit of an aside. That's just for, that's not on the slides. I think the backdoor is more interesting, but that's kind of a bit more devastating. So, yes, Lianbi Financial filed on suspicion of illegally absorbing public deposits, which I think is a term of art for a Ponzi scheme. Gu Guoping is arrested. The Shanghai #1 Intermediate Court in 2021, this was right when I was just finishing this research. This stuff was happening in the news. If you look at the search for the Chinese news, it didn't really get much coverage out west. The Intermediate People's Court holds a public hearing for fraud The Songjian police arrest the Lianbi personnel. So this is a whole roundup, right? Like, everyone's going down. And just, again, to be clear, Gu Guoping isn't like just some nobody. Like, he's a billionaire, right? Like, I mean, this is, this is like rounding up, Bezos would probably be an overstatement. That's more like the Alibaba guy. But, like, this is like one of the big guys, right? Like, whoever's running Apple or whatever, I don't know. So, yeah, he was arrested. And on the morning of December 8th, the Shanghai #1 Intermediate People's Court publicly sentenced the defendants, Gu Guoping and associates, on the case of fundraising fraud. Gu was sentenced to life imprisonment for the crime of fundraising fraud, deprived of political rights for life, and confiscated of all personal property. So, what does this mean for our routers? Yeah, probably no patches. Which means, now, some good news. I have noticed on the OpenWRT forums and so on that there are some instructions for flashing these, OpenWRT on the older model of the routers, where people know how to get root access. Now you can get root access on these ones too, and probably, with a little bit of tinkering, you can get the firmware of your choice installed. And maybe they're getting a little bit scarce now, but like last year I could still find them on for like 10, 15 bucks. They're really cheap, and the antenna is at least strong enough that when I forget that I've left my little research router on, I'm getting the signal like a few doors down the street, like when I'm going for a walk. I'm like, oh look, Phicomm 5E, with some stupid password set on it. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have left that running. Anyway, probably pretty decent hardware on the cheap. I'm sorry, the 0 yuan rebate plan is no longer in effect. So you'll have to take your peer-to-peer lending elsewhere. Thank you. That's all. All right. Question. Oh, I'm seeing something, but it's like my eyesight is just not up to the job. It's probably saying go ahead and take questions because we have all the time in the world. Any questions?
You mentioned that there's that ad push service, but all of the servers are down. Is the domain name up for registration? Has it expired?
Oh, that's an excellent question. You know what? If whoever wants to come up and do I want to give these away? Not quite. Whoever wants the firmware dumps of all of my little firmware collection, it's actually up in my GitHub. I didn't put the link there. There are some compile bugs right now. I'm going to put a release at the end of the day. Like one of my really rude upsets when I got here is that now the last compilation of this tool, where I thought I made trivial changes, is having some issues. So, but it built fine on Linux, continues to do so. I'm going to have the tool up there. It's at my GitHub, which I think is, Oblivious Simplex on GitHub. And if you just go, the repo's name is just Backdoor Lockpick, Backdoor-Lockpick. So sort of a mangled sort of Git history, but it's still the same URL that's referenced in a Medium article that I kind of wrote up, same material. You can get my tool. You can submit a patch if you figure out what's going wrong with the Apple build process. It works fine on Linux, I think. You can grab my little firmware collection and add to it if you find it, because it would be kind of fun to get even more, just have this Phicomm firmware collection and just build it up. All right, and they're all nice little tar balls. They're not blobs. Yeah. So any other questions? I think I'm probably gonna be. It's almost quarter two. I probably should wrap up. Oh, hey, yeah.
Yeah. Is this magic UDP port accessible through the WAN interface?
I wished. I mean, no, but it seems no. For that, you're going to need the other trick.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you can't have it all. Yes. Yeah. Let me go dig through my old browser history databases and stuff. I'll find those. Yeah, I'll put together. I'll put those in a little text file. Yeah. I think write.com.cn or something like that, like the word RIGHT. That one I think I found a bunch on. That one sticks out. But yeah, very active router hacking community. I hope I did them justice. I'm kind of hoping that like whoever wrote like RootAC Pro, the Protocol 1, and I think Protocol 2 hacker, because I've seen some chatter on the forums that there's no tool for the new one. So I hope they can find my tool somehow and like benefit from them, again, despite the language and tech community barrier there. And their tools run on Windows. And I'm sure someone could do a Windows build of my tool. It's mostly pretty simple.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Over to your right. Were there any other obfuscation techniques used by the ELF binary? Because it looks like they were just relying purely on the one encryption routine, but that was it. It looked like it was completely plain code, no other obfuscation.
Oh yeah, no, actually, I was fortunate. There wasn't a whole lot of obfuscation there. And it's funny, like now when I'm looking back on it, like it was one of my kind of early like wins at Tenable, like in I guess fall of 2019 or fall of 2020, early 2021. And so at the time, I'm thinking like, I'm going back and looking. I'm like, well, this is actually pretty simple. Like it's very much just plain English, as it is when you look at like older work. And I'm like, I'm presenting this at like RECON. It's just an ELF file, right? Like, I mean, that's basically just releasing source code. We have people hacking like spaceships and stuff. Like, I don't know. It's pretty readable code, really. I mean, pretty readable binary. Like once you decompile it, there's some a few quirks here and there, but not a whole lot more. There's no code obfuscation that I could tell. I guess that's kind of a subjective call, but it doesn't look like it. Anyone else? Just start talking if your hand's up and I'm not seeing it. Okay, cool. I think it's time for the next talk. Thanks for your patience and attention.